Now is talk about the future, 2013, and get some feedback from you, things that are important, especially to this region, things that are important from a statewide point of view, and we'll talk a little bit about what both the Housing Coalition and the Coalition End Homelessness. We have some carryover items from last year and some things that we've started to think about, and not going to go through these in great detail. Let's see. Let's maybe do this. Because I know you have a lot of interest in the Housing Trust Fund, and I think the very first comment that came up when Shay was talking about the trust fund was $7 million isn't a lot of money, and it's a one-time allocation. So a very high priority for the Housing Coalition and the Homeless Coalition is to figure out how we can ensure that this is not a one-time appropriation, and how we can begin to build a stronger statewide coalition to support an ongoing revenue source for the Housing Trust Fund. So one of the issues there is that, as Shay pointed out, this is basically not in the state code, it's in the budget bill, which is similar but not as good. So we may have as a strategy to go forward with a bill, again, similar to the bill that was defeated this time, which created a housing trust fund and basically takes the existing language in the state code about the Housing Partnership Fund and makes that into a housing trust fund, and with some of the features that are contained in the budget language. So that's one strategy going forward. Also important, or more important than that, is trying to figure out how we can identify an ongoing source of revenue to support the trust fund. And the mortgage settlement is not that. That was a one-time payment to the state. So we have got to find a source within, within the state budget. Those, and that there have been a bunch of approaches in the past on this. Some have involved carving out a piece of a real estate related tax or fee. Some have looked at excess revenue coming in under recordation fees, for example, amount of recordation collections that exceeds what was in the budget projection. We've had a bill introduced at times in the past that looked at taking a piece of the state budget surplus. That's how the state water quality fund is funded. And if you read the paper this morning, you saw that we have, lo and behold, we got $125 million state budget surplus. Wish we had known that during the General Assembly session when they felt they had to take $65 million of mortgage settlement money and use it to plug budget holes. Turned out there weren't budget holes, I guess. So, and the subtext of that $125 million state surplus was, you may have mentioned that they said a certain portion of it was going to the state water control, state water quality fund. 78 million. 78 million. That's a lot.
That's a lot.
Yeah. So that may be, if we're looking forward to a time when we may have state budget surpluses again, that may be a way to pursue that. Any of you have thoughts on strategy for the Housing Trust Fund going forward, or sources of state funding, or any particular insights about your delegation here and how they might be able to help with this? Sure.
The different localities, just sporadic ones, we're looking at, zoning, some type of a boost on density and getting to a fund. I was out of the loop one night, so is that still a potential way to fund the trust fund statewide or no?
Through some kind of, yes. Last year, and maybe this is not what you're talking about, But last year, or 2 years ago, there was a bill introduced which would have essentially codified the ability of localities to create local housing trust funds and implement mechanisms for funding those trust funds. That bill was killed, and it was killed primarily by the home builders. And it was killed by the home builders because they feared that stirring the pot on this would cause localities to create housing trust funds and fund them with proffers or impact fees or such. That clearly wasn't the intention of the Housing Coalition in advancing that legislation, but that was a fear, and that maybe that's what you're referring to, is that idea of...
It was that type of thing, and so if there was that, I don't know, death on a local scale, I would imagine it would just be more gruesome death.
Well, one of the features you brought up, local housing trust fund, is, and you have one in Charlottesville. One of the features of the previous trust fund bills was that there would be, if a locality had a local housing trust fund, there would be a portion of the state trust fund that would go automatically to match that local trust fund. So it was a way to encourage local governments to create local trust funds as well. That did not become a feature of, and from the coalition's point of view, we thought this is a way to encourage localities to implement local trust funds, because they'll see that they get some matching money from the state, and if we can get more localities around the state, there's only a handful now that have housing trust funds. If we can get more localities around the state to implement local housing trust funds, we'll have broader political support for it, et cetera, et cetera. But that's not a part of the current makeup of the trust fund. If we do end up with a bill that attempts to codify the trust fund this session, the risk there is sometimes it's best to let things lie and make a political judgment about maybe it's best not to reopen a conversation because sometimes you can lose ground in the course of that. Keep in mind, this money, $7 million, doesn't come in until the second year of the biennium, so it's really on the table again in the next session of the General Assembly. Now, I don't think it's likely that we lose this money, but it's certainly a possibility. And so there's some question about, how much of an issue do we want to make the Housing Trust Fund in this upcoming session? Because if too much of a light gets shined on it, and legislators are looking for money, we got this by a hair's breadth.
And I think another way we're looking at the $7 million is an opportunity to, like what we're saying, we want to see some results quickly so that we can further demonstrate this is worthy of the state's investment. And so in order to use that $7 million, it's almost kind of like a mini pilot, if you would, is a way to think about it, and therefore make our case stronger for codifying the trust fund.
What was the opposition?
What
were some of the arguments against it? Why?
I think it operated at a very fundamental level, which was this is not something. Hey, we're in a very tough budget time for the state, but I think there's a broader philosophical opposition, especially in the House, that this is not an appropriate area for the state to be investing funds. I mean, there's a thought that there ought to be roads and corrections and education and not much else, beyond that. Now, I think part of the argument that we've tried to make in that regard is an economic development argument, which is a popular place to put money. And so tying housing development to jobs and to economic development, I think, was something that we could get a little bit of traction on, but not a lot. I don't think it was a case of, we certainly didn't hear from people, this is a program that's full of fraud and abuse, or this is it's That wasn't the nature of it, I don't think. I don't know, Robin, you spent a lot more time up at the General Assembly than I did.
I think too, like Bob says, just the economic climate